Is there no one who can fight me? You are all cowards! Send me your best warrior!
Have you ever walked into a room and immediately felt smaller? Maybe it was a job interview where the person across the table seemed more confident, more powerful, and somehow made you question yourself before they even said a word. Maybe it was a conversation with someone who had a louder voice, a stronger personality, or a reputation that made everyone around them uncomfortable. The strange thing is, sometimes the person who intimidates us the most isn't actually the strongest person in the room. Sometimes they win before the battle even begins. Thousands of years ago, an entire army stood frozen on a battlefield. They weren't defeated, they weren't surrounded, they weren't even attacked. They were simply afraid. Standing across from them was a man described as a giant, a warrior whose presence alone created panic. His name was Goliath. Most people remember the story because of the stone, the sling, and the young shepherd named David. But there is another side of this story that is rarely explored. What was happening inside Goliath's mind? How did one man create fear in hundreds of people without even fighting? And why does the psychology behind Goliath still appear in our workplaces, relationships, and everyday lives today? Before we uncover the hidden psychology behind intimidation, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay until the end, because by the final moments, you'll understand why some people appear powerful long before they actually prove they are. When people hear the word Goliath, they usually imagine one thing: a giant, a massive warrior, someone physically impossible to defeat. But the deeper lesson behind Goliath is not only about size, it is about psychology. Intimidation is the process of influencing someone's thoughts, emotions, or behavior by making them feel threatened, powerless, or inferior. It is not always about physical strength. A person can intimidate others through confidence, reputation, status, knowledge, wealth, authority, or even the way they communicate. And this is what makes intimidation so fascinating, because many times, the biggest battle does not happen between two people. It happens inside the mind. Before someone loses confidence, they often lose the belief that they can win. And that is exactly what makes Goliath such an interesting figure. The story is not simply about a giant facing a young shepherd. It is about fear, perception, and the way humans react when they believe something is impossible. But here is where people often misunderstand intimidation. They think intimidating people are always stronger. They think confidence means superiority. They think the person who looks powerful must actually be powerful. But psychology tells us something different. Sometimes intimidation is a performance. Sometimes it is a strategy. And sometimes the person creating fear is depending on you believing the story they created about themselves. To understand why Goliath was so effective, we have to look beyond the battlefield and explore where intimidation comes from. Because every giant has a psychological foundation. So where does intimidation come from? Why do some people naturally make others feel smaller? The answer begins with one of the oldest human instincts: the survival response. For thousands of years, humans depended on recognizing threats quickly. A larger opponent, a louder voice, a person displaying dominance. These signals helped humans decide whether they were safe or in danger. Our brains naturally pay attention to signs of power. This is why someone walking into a room with confidence can immediately change the atmosphere. The brain is constantly asking, who has control? Who has influence? Who should I pay attention to? This reaction is connected to social psychology, the study of how people think, feel, and behave around others. Researchers have discovered that humans are highly influenced by perception. What we believe about someone can affect how we respond to them. This explains why Goliath's strategy was so powerful. Before any physical battle happened, there was already a psychological battle taking place. Every morning, Goliath came forward and challenged the Israelite army. He didn't simply attack. He created a mental environment where fear could grow. He built a reputation. He created an image. He made the enemy imagine defeat before the fight began. And this is one of the most important principles of intimidation. Fear becomes strongest when the mind fills in the unknown. A person may not actually know how powerful their opponent is, but their imagination creates a version that is often much bigger. The modern world works the same way. A difficult boss, a successful person, a public speaker, a competitor. Sometimes the fear we feel is not created by what they have done. It is created by what we assume they can do. And this leads us to one of the biggest secrets behind intimidation. The giant is often built in the mind before it appears in reality. The first characteristic of intimidation is the ability to create a perception of power. Power is not only about what someone has, it is about what others believe they have. Goliath's appearance, reputation, and confidence created a powerful image. Before anyone challenged him, people had already decided he was unbeatable. This happens today too. Imagine meeting someone who is highly successful. Maybe they have an impressive title, expensive clothes, or a strong reputation. Immediately, your brain starts making assumptions. They must know more than me. They must be better than me. They must be impossible to challenge. But perception is not always reality. A person can appear powerful while privately struggling with insecurity. Many intimidating personalities rely on the image they create. Because if people believe the image, the person gains influence. The second characteristic is using fear to control behavior. Fear is one of the strongest human emotions. When people are afraid, they often stop thinking creatively. They become focused on avoiding danger rather than finding solutions. This is why intimidation can be effective. A fearful person is easier to control. In the story of Goliath, the army did not lose because they were physically defeated. They lost because fear affected their decision-making. The battle was delayed because their minds were already convinced they could not succeed. In everyday life, this can appear in many forms. Someone who constantly threatens others. Someone who uses anger to dominate conversations. Someone who makes people afraid to speak honestly. The goal is often the same. Create enough fear that the other person stops resisting. One of the most overlooked weapons of intimidation is reputation. Before Goliath ever stepped onto the battlefield, people already knew his name. They knew his size. They knew his history. They knew the stories surrounding him. And those stories created fear. This happens because humans are influenced by narratives. We do not respond only to what we see. We respond to what we have been told. Think about meeting someone for the first time. Before they even speak, you may already have an opinion because of what others have said. They are difficult. They are brilliant. They are dangerous. They always win. That information changes the way you interact with them. Your brain prepares itself based on the story. This is why reputation can become a psychological weapon. A person who has built a reputation for being dominant may gain control before the conversation even begins. But there is something important to understand. A reputation is not the same as reality. Sometimes a person's reputation is built from truth. Other times, it is built from exaggeration, fear, or misunderstanding. And when someone believes a reputation more than they believe themselves, they surrender power before the challenge begins. Another major characteristic of intimidation is presence. Some people walk into a room and immediately attract attention. They speak with certainty. They move with confidence. They appear comfortable under pressure. This presence can influence how others see them. But here is the interesting part. Confidence and intimidation can look very similar from the outside. The difference is usually the intention behind it. Healthy confidence says, I know my value. Intimidation says, I need you to feel smaller so I can feel bigger. Goliath's confidence was designed to affect the people watching him. His words, appearance, and behavior all created a message. You cannot defeat me. And once people accept that message, they begin acting according to it. This is why confidence is powerful. The way we carry ourselves influences how others respond. But true strength does not require making others feel weak. The final characteristic is one of the most powerful. Intimidation works best when it activates something already inside us. Self-doubt, fear, insecurity, uncertainty. The reason intimidation affects some people more than others is because it connects with internal beliefs. A person who already believes, I am not good enough, I cannot compete, I am going to fail, is much easier to intimidate. The external threat becomes stronger because it matches an internal fear. This is why David's victory was so significant. The difference between David and the soldiers was not simply physical ability. It was perspective. The soldiers saw a giant. David saw a challenge. The same situation created two completely different psychological responses. And that teaches us something important. The size of the obstacle is often influenced by the size we give it in our mind. The psychology of intimidation is not limited to ancient battles. It appears everywhere, in relationships, in families, at work, and even in the way we see ourselves. In relationships, intimidation can create unhealthy dynamics. One person may constantly dominate conversations. They may make the other person afraid to express opinions. Over time, the intimidated person may begin changing their behavior just to avoid conflict. They stop sharing ideas. They stop setting boundaries. They start questioning themselves. In families, intimidation can affect communication. A child growing up around constant fear may learn that speaking honestly is dangerous. They may become overly cautious or afraid of making mistakes. At work, intimidation can influence entire environments. A leader who uses fear may get short-term obedience. People may follow instructions. They may avoid disagreement. But fear-based environments often reduce creativity. People stop sharing ideas because they worry about being criticized. They focus on survival instead of growth. And in everyday life, intimidation affects simple decisions. Maybe you avoid applying for a job because someone more experienced is also applying. Maybe you avoid speaking publicly because you compare yourself to confident speakers. Maybe you avoid trying something new because the challenge feels like a giant standing in front of you. But the important question is the obstacle truly impossible, or has fear convinced you that it is? And this brings us to some surprising discoveries about intimidation that many people never consider. One surprising truth about intimidation is that it requires participation from the person being intimidated. A person can attempt to appear powerful, but the effect depends on whether others accept that image. Without belief, intimidation loses much of its power. This explains why two people can face the same giant and react completely differently. One person freezes, another person takes action. The difference is not always the situation, sometimes it is the interpretation. Many people assume intimidating individuals are naturally fearless, but psychology shows that some intimidating behavior can come from insecurity. A person may use aggression, control, or superiority to protect their own weaknesses. The need to constantly prove dominance can sometimes reveal fear underneath. A person who truly feels secure usually does not need to constantly convince others of their importance. The brain has a powerful ability to imagine possibilities. This helps humans survive, but it can also create unnecessary fear. A difficult conversation can feel like a disaster. A new challenge can feel impossible. A powerful person can seem almost unstoppable. But once we face the situation, we often discover that reality is much smaller than our imagination. The mind can create giants. While intimidation can create influence, it also creates serious problems. A person who relies on intimidation may eventually lose trust. People may obey them, but they may not respect them. Fear can create distance. It can damage relationships. It can prevent honest communication. In organizations, intimidation can create cultures where people hide mistakes instead of fixing them. In personal life, constant intimidation can damage confidence. A person who is repeatedly made to feel powerless may begin believing they actually are powerless. This is one of the biggest dangers. Because the greatest victory of intimidation is not controlling someone's actions. It is controlling their belief about themselves. And once someone believes they cannot succeed, they may stop trying. But the good news is that psychology also shows us how people can break free from intimidation. So how do you deal with intimidation? How do you stand in front of your own Goliath? The first step is understanding what is actually happening. When we feel intimidated, our brain often moves into a threat response. We focus on danger. We focus on everything that could go wrong. The first solution is to slow down and separate facts from assumptions. Ask yourself, what do I actually know? What am I imagining? What evidence do I have? Many fears become smaller when we examine them. The second step is building internal confidence. Confidence is not believing you will always win. Confidence is believing you can handle the challenge. A person with confidence can say, "This is difficult, but I can learn. I may not know everything, but I can improve. I can face this." The third step is developing emotional control. Intimidation often succeeds because it creates an emotional reaction. When someone becomes angry, scared, or overwhelmed, they lose clarity. Learning to manage emotions creates space between the situation and the response. This is why practices like reflection, preparation, communication skills, and self-awareness are so valuable. A therapist might encourage someone dealing with intimidation to explore deeper questions. Why does this person's opinion control my confidence? What belief about myself is being triggered? Where did I learn that I am not capable? Because sometimes the real battle is not against the person in front of us, it is against the fear inside us. The goal is not to become arrogant. The goal is to become grounded. Because a person who knows their worth is much harder to control through fear. And that leads us to an interesting comparison. Because many people confuse intimidation with something else. Power. But they are not the same. Now that we've explored the psychology behind intimidation, we need to look at something even more important. Because many people confuse intimidation with strength. They see someone who is loud, aggressive, controlling, or dominant, and assume that person must be powerful. But that is not always true. A person can look powerful while secretly depending on fear. And another person can appear quiet while carrying incredible inner strength. This is where the story of Goliath becomes even more interesting. Because the real contrast in the story was not simply a giant versus a shepherd. It was one type of power against another. Fear-based power versus authentic confidence. And understanding the difference can completely change the way we view ourselves and the people around us. Sometimes it comes from insecurity. Sometimes it comes from a need for status. Sometimes it comes from environments where dominance was rewarded. True confidence develops differently. It comes from self-awareness. It comes from accepting strengths and weaknesses. A confident person does not need to prove they are better than everyone else. They are comfortable knowing who they are. Behavior. An intimidating person often tries to influence others through pressure. They may use fear. They may exaggerate their abilities. They may make others feel uncertain. A confident person influences through trust. They communicate clearly. They listen. They allow others to have opinions. The difference is simple. Intimidation says, "Respect me because you are afraid." Confidence says, "Respect me because I respect myself." and others. Intimidating people often focus on appearance, how they look, how they are perceived, how much authority they seem to have. Confident people focus on substance, what they know, what they can learn, how they treat others. One is built on image, the other is built on identity. Intimidation creates relationships based on fear. People may stay silent, they may avoid conflict, they may hide their true thoughts. Confidence creates healthier relationships. People feel safe communicating. They can disagree without feeling threatened. They can grow together. In careers, intimidation can sometimes create quick results. A fearful team may work harder temporarily, but long-term success usually requires trust. The best leaders are not those who make everyone afraid. They are those who inspire people to perform at their best. An intimidated person often makes decisions based on avoiding failure. They ask, "What if I lose? What if people judge me?" A confident person asks, "What can I learn? What opportunity exists here?" The situation may be the same. The mindset is different. Intimidation creates emotional reactions: fear, anxiety, defensiveness. Confidence creates emotional stability, calmness, focus, resilience. And this brings us back to Goliath. Because the most fascinating part of the story is not that David defeated a giant. It is that David refused to see himself as defeated before the battle even started. The most famous example of intimidation is the original story itself. Goliath represented overwhelming appearance. He had the armor, the size, the reputation, the experience. Everything about him communicated, "You cannot win." But David approached the situation differently. He did not deny the challenge. He simply refused to let fear define the outcome. The lesson is not that every obstacle is easy. The lesson is that perception influences performance. A modern example can be found in the world of technology. Steve Jobs became famous for his powerful presentation style. Part of his influence came from understanding communication. He knew how to create anticipation, how to tell a story, how to create emotion. This shows that influence is not only about having information, it is also about how people experience your message. Think about many famous movie villains. Often, what makes them frightening is not only what they do, it is the image surrounding them, the music, the reputation, the stories people tell, the mystery. The same psychological principle appears. The unknown often feels larger than reality. Imagine a new employee entering a company. They hear, "The manager is impossible. Everyone is scared of them. They never accept mistakes." Before the employee even meets the manager, fear has already formed. The person has become a psychological giant. Sometimes the reality matches the reputation. Sometimes it does not. But the effect is already happening. The story of Goliath is remembered as a battle between strength and weakness. But underneath the surface, it is a story about the human mind. Intimidation works because humans respond to perception. People can be controlled not only by what happens, but by what they believe might happen. Goliath's greatest weapon was not just his size. It was the fear he created before the battle began. But the lesson from David is powerful. The presence of a giant does not automatically mean defeat. Sometimes the biggest obstacle is the belief that we cannot overcome it. True strength is not making others feel small. True strength is knowing who you are, even when something bigger stands in front of you. Now I want to hear from you. What surprised you most about the psychology of Goliath? Do you think intimidation comes more from the person creating fear, or from the person receiving it? Have you ever experienced a situation where someone seemed powerful at first, but later you realized their power was mostly an image? Share your thoughts in the comments. The most interesting discussions often come from real experiences. If you enjoyed uncovering the hidden psychology behind Goliath, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more videos exploring history, human behavior, psychology, and the stories behind the people who shaped the world. And if you want to continue exploring the hidden side of human nature, watch our next video where we uncover another fascinating psychological mystery. Remember, sometimes the biggest battles are not fought with weapons. They are fought inside the mind. Thank you for watching.